19th, and if we could have roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair Madrone. Supervisor Bohn?
Yes.
Supervisor Bushnell? Good morning. Supervisor Wilson?
Aquí.
Supervisor Arroyo?
Present.
And Supervisor Madrone.
Present.
Thank you.
All right, and if, let's go ahead and join us with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And CIO Hayes, do we have any modifications to the agenda?
Good morning, Chair Madrone. There are no modifications to the agenda today.
Oh, look at that. Okay. Well, we'll start with our consent agenda then. Is there any questions, comments from the board before we jump in on the consent agenda? None? Okay. And we do have a couple of proclamations. And so we'll go ahead and jump right into those and read those, and then we'll go to the public, and both in Zoom and in the audience. So first proclamation is to proclaim April 23rd, 2023 through April 29th, 2023 as National Crime Victims' Right Week in Humboldt County. Supervisor Bohn.
Come on up, kids. See, if you would have sat up front, it'd been a shorter walk. I told you. I want to welcome Stacy, Nikki, and her team. Proclamation of the Board of Supervisors from the County of Humboldt. Whereas since 1982, the District Attorney Victim Witness Office has provided service to thousands of crime victims, witnesses, their families, and loved ones each year. Whereas victims of crime and their loved ones often face severe financial, physical, and psychological trauma. Whereas victim witness advocates and other staff are available to answer questions, help victims and their families cope with the trauma they have experienced, as well as the often complicated criminal justice system. Whereas an effective and fair criminal justice system must recognize the rights of victims and balance them with those of the accused. Whereas all agencies are encouraged to strengthen partnerships to coordinate direct and referral services to crime victims. Whereas all citizens are encouraged to increase their awareness of the impact of violent crime, the needs of crime victims, and the vital services of DA Victim Witness has to offer. Now, therefore, it be proclaimed that the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors recognize April 23rd through 29th, 2023 as National Crime Victims' Rights Week and express appreciation to the District Attorney, the Victim Witness Office for the 41 years of dedicated service to the citizens of Humboldt County.
Ooh.
That's where we clap, you guys.
You guys want to look this way? Rex.
Look this way.
He said we're the photo bombers in the back.
All right, and I imagine we'll have a few more of the same crew coming back up. We've got the second proclamation is appreciation of Child Abuse Service Team, or CAST, for their 27 years of service. Michelle, Supervisor Bushnell.
Thank you. Anybody receiving one? Hi, Stace. Okay, so proclamation of the Board of Supervisors, County of Humboldt. Whereas the impact,
Here they come.
okay. Whereas the impact of sexual assault and child maltreatment can cause severe and long-lasting physical, emotional, and psychiatrical consequences, the experience can be devastating not only for the child, but also for the family and friends of the child. And whereas sexual assault and child maltreatment cross all ethnic, culture, socioeconomic backgrounds, the tragedy of child abuse can cause disabilities and poor health, depression, poor academic performance, alcohol and other drug problems, and abusive adult relationships. And whereas it is recognized that child abuse is an adverse childhood experience, ACEs, that has a lifetime effect on the survivor, and studies have shown that stability, support, and healthy relationships have a positive impact on the child. Impacted by ACEs, CAS promotes stability and support for the child, family, caregivers through the multidisciplinary team approach. And whereas the Child Abuse Service Team, CAST, a multidisciplinary team comprised of special trained individuals representing Child Welfare Service and District Attorney's Office, Humboldt Domestic Violence Services, Law Enforcement, Mental Health, North Coast Rape Crisis Team, and tribal agencies, was created to reach one of the most vulnerable and populations in our Humboldt County community, children who are victims of sexual and physical abuse. I just have to say I have contacts that are new, and I apologize. Whereas CAST is a national accredited child advocacy center through the National Children's Alliance, the office provides a child-friendly setting for forensic interviews to occur. And whereas since October 1996, the Child Abuse Service Team has conducted 3,653 comprehensive forensic interviews, and this coordinated response has proven successful in the criminal investigation and prosecution of child abuse cases. And whereas the effective intervention of child abuse service teams' multidisciplinary approach to child abuse investigations has reduced the number of interviews a child abuse victim must undergo. And whereas CAST interviews may also be used to interview witnesses of violent crimes, assault, and domestic violence, and sometimes used in cases where there are allegations of neglect and drug endangerment. Whereas the citizens of Humboldt County benefit from coordinated service provided from the Child Abuse Service Team. Now therefore be it resolved that the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors hereby expresses appreciation to the members of the Child Abuse Service Team for the 27 years of service to sexual and physical abuse victims of Humboldt County. This happened last time too, I apologize. Before I come up though, I do want to say that my family, I know some of you have heard, but my family, 20 years ago, I was in a very terrible spousal abuse relationship. And my ex-husband was arrested, and my children were very young. And they were given services, my family, my children, and myself were given services by Victim Witness and the CAST program. My children had to testify against their father. It made such a huge difference in their life and how they were able to process going forward. And so I personally know the effects of what the good work you guys are all doing, and I have appreciated it since then. And my children are now grown, great, have families of their own, and still remember the intervention that they received from the District Attorney's Office. So personally, I say thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll go first. Connie Beth, Health and Human Services Director. I just want to say thank you.
Turn the mic on, Steve.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
We tested them.
They're testing
All right.
twice.
I just want to say thank you to Stacy and her team, and our investigators that aren't here today, and for Cheryl standing in for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to the board. Thank you Supervisor Bushnell, Supervisor Bohn, Chair Madrone, Supervisor Wilson, Supervisor Arroyo for the support from the board. We really appreciate that. I also want to extend my gratitude to our community partners, North Coast Rape Crisis Team, Humboldt Domestic Violence Services, tribal agencies, as well as Department of Health and Human Services for the ongoing partnership that we've had. And without all of these entities, we certainly couldn't do the work that we do. I have tremendous gratitude, and I'm so very proud of our team. It's hard to appreciate and understand the magnitude of the volume as well as the degree of trauma that some of our community members unfortunately experience here. And to have the support that our members are able to provide to individuals who have been impacted by violent crime, sexual abuse, is something that words just cannot begin to explain. So I'm very grateful for their dedication and devotion, and really the personal impact that they take on by doing the work that they do. So I want to express my gratitude to them. Additionally, I really want to express my gratitude to all of the victims and community members that do come forward and make reports of victimization within the community. So again, words cannot begin to explain the degree of strength that takes to come forward, and then also to have the patience to work with the system as we navigate through. So I have a tremendous amount of appreciation, and I really, from my heart, do thank you all for supporting what we do. Thank you.
Thank you all. Supervisor Bohn.
Yeah, I'd like to, as I do this, it's the first year I've got to do this out, Miss Mosier being up there, and I remember my first week on the job, she came to my office and says, "We need a new office." And I want to thank Nikki and for taking over, and the team. I think it was a seamless transition. She's got a great team. I had the extreme pleasure of taking my grandson up there just for a visit because, Stacy, you said you wanted to thank the victims and for coming forward. Well, they're going to come forward if they have a welcoming place. And I don't know, my grandson has no trauma yet until he crosses me one more time. But anyway, no. But I mean, he had so much fun up there, and all the stuff you have available to make them feel at ease. So the last 3 times he's come to the courthouse, he says, "Can we go back up there?" But I think that's one of the best moves. I know Joyce was a big part of it. I know Nikki brought it in and finished it out. And I think if you haven't been up there, it's a pretty cool place. And so that when kids are traumatized, they have a very welcoming place and a very welcoming staff that makes them at ease because they're already traumatized enough. We don't need the sterile. It's a lot better place. So thanks for the transition. Nikki, glad you're at top.
All right, and we have one more resolution to read, and that is in recognition of Judge Abby Avenatti with the Yurok tribe. So I don't think she's here today, but we're going to go ahead and read the resolution. It's a bit of a long one, so bear with me. Whereas Judge Abby Avenatti, a dynamic and effective leader for equal access to the justice system and expanded resources and programs for Native American residents across California, has been selected by Senate Majority Leader Mike McGuire as the 2023 North Coast Woman of the Year. And whereas Judge Abby is a trailblazer who was the first tribal woman to pass the state bar and become a judge in California, and has proudly held the title as Chief Tribal Court Judge since 2007. And whereas during her successful tenure as Chief Tribal Court Judge, Avenatti has been laser focused in the murdered and missing Indigenous people crisis, which has disproportionately impacted women in the Yurok tribe, and has led the way to significantly expand services and programs available to combat the MMIP crisis, along with creating Yurok culturally centered court services, including child support court, wellness, diversion, and whereas Judge Abby's commitment to fighting for families, women, and tribal justice is second to none, and she has helped countless individuals and families access justice and rebuild their lives. And whereas in 2020, Abenanti was recognized with the Lawrence R. Baca Lifetime Achievement Award by the Indian Law Section of the Federal Bar Association for dedicating her career to integrating Native values in the justice system. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors congratulates Judge Abby Abenanti on her award of the Women of the Year and expresses its deep appreciation for her unwavering dedication to justice and her tireless efforts to make the justice system more accessible and responsive to the needs of Native American residents across California. Be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be presented to Judge Abby Abenanti in recognition of her outstanding achievements and contributions to the people of Humboldt County and the state of California. Congratulations, Dr. Abby, or Judge Abby, excuse me. So any additional comments on any of this from board members? How about on the consent agenda? Any additional comments? Seeing none, we'll go to the Zoom and see if we have any hands up.
No, Chair Madrone, we don't.
No.
Oh, well, yes, we do.
Okay.
7718.
Okay, 7718, this is your chance for public comment on the consent agenda. If you could please tell us which item you're commenting on, and you have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Chair Madrone,
Yes.
we're having issues with Zoom sound, so caller, please hang on just a second.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. I see they are unmuted.
Caller, can you try and speak now? No.
Okay, while we work on that, I'm going to go ahead and go to those here in the audience while we work on the technical aspects. So we will come back to you, 7718. Anybody here today in the audience who would like to come forward and speak, this is your opportunity. This is on the consent agenda. Seeing none, well, that didn't use up much time. I see their box light up like they're trying to talk, but
Yeah.
we see you trying to talk, 7718. We're still working on technical difficulties at our end. Luckily, we have a light agenda today. Do you want to?
I have a comment.
Please.
Break the silence. So, but there is something I just want to remind folks that we do have in here the quarterly report of current and projected vacancies for the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors, appointed boards, committees, and commissions. Please, as any public member that has interest in volunteering for any one of these committees, even if they're full now, please put in applications. Your application for any one of these, you can find them on our website. They're a great way to volunteer and provide service to this community. But like I said, even if they're full, we often get vacancies rotating through, and so it's great to have those applications in the roster. So please do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor Wilson. And I also want to note that in the consent agenda, we have some wonderful contracts we're doing with Redwood Community Action Agency, who also has been an incredible partner in our community, supporting our youth and working with our Department of Health and Human Services on many wonderful programs there. Are we good now?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Caller, can you unmute? Thank you. No, we are not good. They can hear on Zoom. We just can't hear in here, I'm being told.
Okay. Well, and next we have public comment, so.
I don't know if you want to take a little break or.
Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break. We're in recess. We'll be back in 5 minutes or 10, hopefully with the resolution. We are back. Please put your tray tables up and your hands, keep them in the in the cabin. Sorry for the difficulties. We think we've resolved them. So we were at public comment from Zoom folks, and we have 7718. Please let us know what consent item you're speaking on. You've got 3 minutes. Welcome.
Hello, Kent Sawatsky. I hope you can hear me.
We can. Welcome.
I wish to speak on the victim witness topic that we had, the proclamation. And I really feel that that's a wonderful thing, that so many people out here are victims of what I refer to as an inferior judicial system, and a lot of people feel that way. These days, there's way too many victims that because of the DA being hobbled and the sheriff being hobbled and the legal system being hobbled, that their rights are not preserved. So I want to apologize to those people, but I do want to do the shout out because I do know some of the people that went through very traumatic things, and what the county did for them with the victim witness assistance there is phenomenal. And that's my comment on that particular consent item. Thank you for my opportunity to speak, and hope I'm not the problem here today.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else in Zoom? I don't see any other hands up. So at this point, we'll go to those here in the audience today. Anybody wish to speak on the consent agenda? This is your opportunity to come forward. I know I already did that, but just giving a second chance. And again, seeing nobody coming forward, we'll bring it back to the board. Supervisor Bushnell.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Motion to approve by Supervisor Bushnell and seconded by Supervisor Arroyo. And if we can, I don't know if we have our voting tabs up or not.
I'm going to have to do roll call,
Okay.
Chair Madrone.
Sounds good.
So Supervisor Arroyo,
Yes.
Supervisor Madrone,
Yes.
Supervisor Wilson,
Yes.
Supervisor Bushnell,
Yes.
and Supervisor Bohn.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 5-0.
Great, thank you very much. And again, apologize for the technical difficulties. If you want to really be sure that you're going to get your input in, the best way in today's world is to be here in person. We probably will start putting a disclaimer into our agenda in the near future because this continues to happen and it's just not a certain place to be able to provide input, but we're glad that our IT folks were able to help us get it fixed today. Okay, with that, we are moving on our agenda, and next we have public comment on non-agenda items. So I'll go to Zoom first, and we do have one hand up. Again, that is 7718. Welcome. This is public comment on non-agenda items. You've had 3 minutes.
Yes, Sawatsky, do we have it dialed in?
Yes, sir.
Great. I did wish to comment today on taxes. It's kind of been rumored out there that the county is considering raising sales tax considerably, maybe 2 House-sent initiatives coming before the voters. And it's part of the reason I think we're going after these needing more money is we've already been in a cash economy for a long time. Many people would say we've probably missed out on at least 50% of our sales tax during the past decade here that we would have because of what we have a cash economy. Down in Mexico, you kind of want to learn from when you raise your taxes too high, people barter, and you have strictly cash economy. Down here, hopefully you'll learn from what happens. If someone's doing a $1,000 job for me, they say, I can do it for $1,000. If you want a receipt, we're going to have to add the 18% tax onto it. And so I'm sure the people down here go ahead and stay in the cash economy. But I want to caution people out there, you people, when you consider raising the taxes, that you push us all into a cash and border economy, and that won't actually put any more money in your coffer. I think there are other ways to take care of putting money in there rather than taxing, especially the poor people, the regressive tax. Why should somebody who is now living in a city, taking community bus, not driving a car, why should they be paying sales tax to fix the county roads for the people who are out in the county? I think districts should be formed and let people form districts out for certain areas like Shelter Cove or other areas, and those districts should be able to put a tax upon themselves, and I think that's the best way to do it. That's what the state does. They give you extra benefits if you have a self-imposed tax. Well, I think that maybe we would match the funds that we put into their roads from their districts they form. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this topic today.
Thank you, commenter. And next we have 3053. *6 to unmute. There you go. Welcome.
Good morning, Thomas Mulder here. I just want to confirm you can hear me there, Chair.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. A couple different things under non-agenda items. First off, I'd say it was great. I was able to participate last week in this Zoom meeting about the Climate Action Plan. There was a lot of information there, and there was a group of individuals that I heard comment of. I got kicked off a couple of times, but I felt that they really wanted to not include a bunch of our previous emissions in the Climate Action Plan. I don't remember the board actually taking that action. I remember it was kind of at a 3-2, and the way it went forward was we'll deal with that later when the seats change, the votes change. But just want to be cautious. Anyone out there listening to try to participate, there's another one today. I think it's very, very important if you care about your children being able to be in rural communities and enjoy dirt roads and cleaning ditches and all that kind of wonderful stuff and not concrete boxes stacked on top of each other, probably comment today. Other things, very, very disheartened about the public process. I hope that each and every one of you supervisors, if you put anyone on any of those committees or anything, that you clearly explain to them rules, and you clearly, if you're communicated with in co-communication, encourage them to take part in the ex parte communication, because I will tell you right now, my trust in the public process is pretty hurt right now. I think all 5 of you are aware of what I'm talking about. So just please make sure that whatever those ex parte are, that we just disclose them, and no hidden agendas. Just be transparent about what we're trying to do. It would make a big difference for the citizens of Humboldt County and the future generations. And lastly, just continue working together, government and community, to have a better community. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, commenter. And with that, we'll see if there's anybody here in the audience today who would like to give us a public comment on non-agenda items. And seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. And now we have our next item, which we have some closed sessions at 2 o'clock, so we're going to jump over those. What we have is item G1, which is a presentation on a full-day tour of the Nordic Aqua Farms facility in Denmark. Supervisor Arroyo.
Great. Well, I had the opportunity while on a personal vacation to tour the Nordic Aqua Farms facilities that they have out in far northwestern Denmark. So this came about, before we pull up my slides and go through some photos and some information about the facility, this came about because as a new supervisor, Nordic Aqua Farms reached out and said, hey, we'd like to, just have a chance to tell you about what we're up to and, meet and get to know you. And in that conversation, they mentioned that they had a fully operational onshore fish farming operation in Hanstholm, Denmark. And I said, I'm flying in and out of Copenhagen on a personal vacation. Is there any chance that if I can make it work in my schedule that I can come out there to see the facility? And they said, well, gosh, of course. So it was not a proposal by the company that I come and visit. It was rather that I was able to make it work, and I thought it would be really informative, and it was. So, Nikki, are you able to pull up my slides? Thank you so much.
Nice, there we go.
Okay, so they didn't sponsor my trip. I asked for it and went on my own dime. So we can go ahead with the next slide. So I'll walk you through a few things about the facility. I know there were a lot of questions that people in my, in my district really posed in advance of this. People that I know who reached out to and said, hey, if you could learn anything about this facility, what would you want to know? So I tried to pay special attention to those things. And so I'll touch on those as I go. So this is in Hanstholm, Denmark, which is about 7 hours from Copenhagen. So it's Denmark's a very small country, but and I thought, it's in Denmark, it'll be really close. But I ended up having to take, because it was a pretty full day, I ended up spending the night nearby and driving back the next day. So it was about as far as you can get from Copenhagen. So this is on the, they call it Skagerrak, the part of the Pacific, or the Atlantic Ocean, that's between Denmark and Norway, has its own name. So Skagerrak Sea is what you're seeing in this picture here. But it is essentially the North Atlantic. And there's an ocean water intake and outfall for the facility that is pictured here. So they acquire all public power. So locally, there's only publicly owned and operated power generation facilities. A lot of it is wind, but not all of it. There are windmills absolutely everywhere. So there are turbines both on land and sea all over the country. And the land is leased from the local harbor authority. So there are a lot of similarities to the proposed operation here in Humboldt. The land's leased long-term from the harbor authority. It's a highly regulated coastal area, so Denmark has extremely stringent coastal regulations, as does the European Union, of which they're a member state. And then it's really close to one of the largest landing ports for marine fisheries in the area. So the Port of Hanstholm is by ex-vessel value, so the value of the product that's offloaded, one of the highest production ports in Northern Europe. And it is also a very popular surf spot. You can't see the waves in this picture, but there were some. The surf there is obviously a little different than it is here, but they call it Cold Hawaii, which I thought was cute because it doesn't look like Hawaii at all. But there's apparently great surf, and so immediately outside in the middle picture, you can see that to the left, you can kind of see the dunes. That's actually where people park to surf, so right across the street from the facility. So this is Sashimi Royal, which is their yellowtail kingfish operation. So in the larger picture, the building that you can see kind of in the middle, it's a shorter building, is the facility that's been in place since 2015 that does the kingfish grow out. The building closest to the picture taker, the one on the far left that's larger, is their new juvenile building that is being built out for juvenile rearing. And then the other dark blue gray building at lower right is the water quality filtration. And other buildings nearby are unrelated facilities. So we can go to the next slide, thank you. All right, so this is inside the adult kingfish grow out facility. So there is one large tank with 2 age classes of fish that are separated into 2 like raceways that are nested one within another. So they're like 2 concentric circles. And there are some challenges with that for them. They can never fully drain the tank because they always have fish at different ages coming in and out of the tanks. So future facilities would be designed differently, but this was, again, designed in 2015 and built. They did get some grant funding from the European Union Environment Program and other sources to start the facility. because aquaculture is something that's really being spurred on by government investment there. But the water is heated in this facility. Kingfish and I think any species that they could potentially grow would need the water to be heated because it's quite cold coming directly from the ocean. And then the center of the facility, so the bottom picture shows a bunch of black piping and stuff. I realize folks watching this can't really know what that is. So it's both the heating and the and piping that goes to the bioremediation tank that's underneath that central kind of circle. And that has essentially like oddly shaped pieces of plastic covered in bacteria that help eat the fish poop, to put it in non-technical terms. And so there's catwalks around the facility. I wasn't able to be in there for a really long time because the fish get startled a little bit easily, and they don't really want there to be a lot of movement or talking in there. So we walked around fairly quickly, looked at some things, and then spent most of our tour outside of this facility. So this new juvenile rearing expansion that's happening is the building next door. So they're really producing a lot at their hatchery and are limited for space and therefore limited as far as their production because of this kind of juvenile rearing period that they need to accommodate. So these are going to be young fish. I'm not sure exactly how old, but in that kind of like middle range. This will allow them to be transferred over to the adult rearing and grow out facility more easily. And they're literally just piped in a tube. They're either trucked and sent through a tube to these tanks or piped between the two facilities. And they can conserve energy moving fish that way. And I just wanted to show this to kind of really indicate how much investment they're making in that facility. I know one of the questions that residents of our county asked was around the capacity of the company because there had been some changes in the management, and there were questions about whether they were able to invest. And so I don't know what this all means for our community, but I know that they're investing really heavily in this facility. Okay, so a little bit about water treatment processes. That's not an exciting thing to take photos of, but nonetheless, the water bodies that they're both taking water from and delivering treated effluent to are natural bodies of water. So the ocean and the top picture there is a fjord. It's not deep like the fjords I think of further north, but that is a fjord, so it's just a little inlet of water. And on the left, you can see this giant ozonator that ozonates the water at 2 different stages in the process. And then the bottom right is just some of the settling tanks and the bioremediation tanks for their new facility. So they're quite large. And there are 6 or 7 stages in the water treatment process that I was particularly interested in because water quality is such a big concern for all of us. Okay, so there's a hatchery and broodstock facility. So this is where water quality testing and invertebrate monitoring, which little invertebrates are what feed the fish. This is where all of that happens. So they're also employing a number of scientists to do that kind of work. And you can see in the picture at the top, the photo, almost like painting-like framing of the fjord that the water goes into and comes from. And I think that's all I wanted to say about this picture. All right, so the hatchery facility, this has been in place for more than 30 years. It was used for turbot, which is like similar to halibut, flatfish, and some other fish over the years, and it was repurposed for kingfish, so this is not a purpose-built facility like the other ones are. But it has been used for hatchery operations for the last 8 or 9 years by them. There are outdoor settling tanks, and so one of the questions that folks also had was about the smell of some of these facilities, and I will say that the only place that there was a little bit of notable funk was these outdoor settling tanks. They're quite far from any neighborhoods though, and it was only really standing that close to the tank that you could smell it. So the smell was really minimal. Standing inside and also being outside of that other building that we looked at, where the adult kingfish are grown to scale. It smelled like a freshwater aquarium. Like you could kind of smell that like almost fish food smell, but it was so faint, even inside the facility. I'm really sensitive to smell, so I thought it was interesting that they've managed smell pretty effectively. And then this also houses their broodstock program. I think the next slide has a few pictures of that. So the goal is to rear healthy fish that are bred in captivity. So these are really fish that are being bred to be grown out for food. So they're not, impacting wild stocks of this species. So bringing in, at some point the fish are wild, but these fish here are several generations away from the wild fish. And so they're selecting the healthiest fish to gather fertilized eggs from and rear them in the hatchery. And then I met some of the people behind the operation. I know another question residents had locally was, how do people feel about it in their communities? Frankly, because I tagged this on to an already existing vacation and took 2 full days for the travel and the tour, I didn't have time to also go into neighborhoods and just sit down with people and ask them what they thought of the facility. I did go to a local restaurant where they served the product that is grown there, so it's right in that same town, and had a chance to eat the kingfish, which is on the right side of this picture. And that's not a beer, not that it really matters, but that's a candle. Anyone's wondering. So the kingfish in the picture is sashimi, so it's eaten raw. I had a chance to try it, and it was very tasty. It's really popular in the sushi industry, and the fish that's produced at that facility is sold to restaurant suppliers. So it goes directly to restaurant suppliers and then to restaurants. So it's not sold to local residents. So I didn't have a chance to ask local residents what they thought about it. I will say that aquaculture is extremely common in Northern Europe. It's just there are many, many, many aquaculture facilities, so it's just more culturally, I think, accepted and part of the culture. This is still a little different from most of their aquaculture facilities. Just traveling around, we saw a lot of pens, so netted areas, enclosures where fish are being raised in fjords or bays. So this is still a little bit unusual there to have the land-based industry. So we did get a chance to meet a few of the people involved in the operation. So Søren Madison is the CEO of Sashimi Royal, so heads that operation right in Hansdom. And then Yasser Zahedi, the hatchery manager for the hatchery side of things and the broodstock operation. He had an interesting history, having come from doing sturgeon work in the Middle East. So he has a lot of experience with different kinds of fish. So the folks I spoke to, I was also curious, what their thoughts were just generally working for the company. They seemed very happy. Of course, I expect that they would say that to me, but it still seemed very earnest. And it seems like they also get what they need from the company when it comes to investment and operations. So one example was that they had, when they first opened their kingfish grow out facility, 2015, 2016, they had water quality issues, and they had to redesign the facility and invest significant resources to meet their water quality testing parameters. So they were able to completely redesign the facility. So the water quality involves going through this bioremediation, like settling tanks where all the particulate matter settles out, then going through filters, going to these bioremediation tanks where bacteria eat the bad stuff, then going through the ozonator, and UV light, so killing viruses and ozonating the water, and then it goes back through that whole cycle again. So I found that particularly interesting, and now they seem to have a good relationship with their regulators and are able to meet those water quality parameters. But they did have a point where they were not meeting them, and then they had to retool the facility. So that was important to me, thinking about whatever our future is with Nordic Aqua Farms, to know that as a company they were able to invest the money to meet that higher and stricter level of regulation. So I think that is my last slide. The only other thing I wanted to, really highlight is, again, this was on my own dime, and I am not aiming to provide this information to necessarily promote this operation, but I thought it would be really helpful to understand more about what this really looks like on the ground, how much footprint it takes up, what types of facilities these are, how they're staffed, and just generally get a sense of how clean and functional the operations were. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have about it.
Thank you, Supervisor Arroyo, and appreciate you taking the time on your vacation to bring back this interesting information for us. Any questions, comments from the board? Supervisor Wilson? Nope, sorry.
I appreciate this. I want to say that going out of town does offer us opportunities to visit places we wouldn't ordinarily see, and that have tangents or connectivity to where we are. I want to say that I think that I appreciate the nerdy side trips on my vacations. I want to say that when I was Harbor District Commissioner, I did visit virtually every port in California and ports everywhere I would go, much to the chagrin of some of my family members. But I found it super fascinating and very interesting to see how small and large ports operate. And I was always amazed at how folks in those facilities were happy to have visitors of interest. And I will say many of those places did have aquaculture facilities, and in Hawaii there is there is an energy lab, federal energy lab, that has like almost 500 acres of aquaculture associated with it, and is a great tourist place to go to on the Big Island. So I just want to say, I don't find it unusual at all to visit these locations. And I appreciate these photos, and it's good for us to get some perspective sometimes about where the rest of the world is on some of these issues. I was in Chile this winter for a little bit, and yeah, the offshore aquaculture in the pens is everywhere in that space. It is really amazing to see that, but also to remember that so much of the aquaculture or the farmed fish, which is most of the fish we actually get imported here into the United States, has effluents that are completely untreated and are directly input into the environment. And so it's interesting to see how much effort goes into these facilities, and the energy it requires and the treatment it requires to meet those standards for effluent standards, and the challenge around that. So that's all. I appreciate the report.
Thank you, Supervisor Wilson. Supervisor Bohn?
We used to, years ago, I don't think anybody here remembers, we used to do our vacation photos every week and tell what we used to do. But no, thanks for doing that. I was wondering, have they started, I know Denmark has been a big push, I was reading, they're doing a big push to put the energy effects of their farmed fish on the labels. They're actually going to be the first country, and I know it's really got, because I know that this fish plant is a huge, right in the middle of climate change and everything else, it's a huge energy user, and I was wondering if they had started that yet, and how much, I know Nordic has got so many different arms to, and I was wondering if they talked about, I know one time they came out with a quote that says they're going to build the Humboldt plant after they build the main plant. It was, I think, was said, and I know much to I'll applaud our planning and building. They were trying to get everything permitted so they'd build here first, and I don't know if we're being successful or anything like that. So did they mention that, what their time, I'm sure they mentioned it. I didn't know if they told you couldn't say or whatever, but do they plan on building in the next 6 or 8 years here, or?
Good questions. So the person I met with was really the CEO of that operation. And so while he had, he said he attends and observes, the board meetings and kind of tracks that. He said there was one coming up that I think was actually last week, so I need to dig into what happened in that meeting that I think was going to outline some of the plans of the company in a broader way. And, you know, he anticipated potentially coming to Humboldt at some time in the future to help advise or make recommendations about the facility and, you know, incorporate lessons learned, you know, if and when they are able to proceed. But he didn't say exactly what the timing would be or any of that. He just said, I really hope to, you know, be able to visit Humboldt. And I said, you know, we'd be glad to show you around and kind of, you know, warmly welcome you and show you what our facility, you know, our area has to offer. So they were very interested in, and everybody knew that there was an ocean outfall here that was quite different from what they had there. So every other facility, I believe, is working with like a near shore or immediately, you know, right from shore into the water body outfall. And so it was interesting to them. That was certainly on their radar. So I don't know what the timing is going to be, whether they're going to, you know, put our project before the main project or not. And then as far as the labeling of fish, they had just come back from a seafood conference in Spain where they had talked about, I think there are some EU regulations coming down as well around labeling of the energy costs and some of the other environmental factors. So they had talked about doing that, but I think their distributors would be the ones to do that, and they would, you know, provide the information.
Okay. And since you opened the door and people are going to ask, I'm going to ask our planning building director, what has been the, because I thought Nordic had an office here for a while, didn't they? Didn't they have a ribbon cutting for an office also? Down on 3rd Street? Was that right? Just guessing here.
Through the chair.
Director Ford, please.
Thank you. They still do have an office here. They are still proceeding ahead. They still are working on the project. And they are currently working with the Coastal Commission on their permitting, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and also with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So they're very actively pursuing their permits right now.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. No other comments from the board?
I did want to
Please.
come back around to something that Supervisor Wilson said about energy. And yes, this is a very energy intensive facility. And I think it, they are growing a fish there for a specific market that is frankly highly lucrative. Kingfish and, you know, the sushi market is a very lucrative market in fisheries. And, you know, they're growing a fish that is not from the North Atlantic. And, you know, so it's a completely, I would say it's a completely artificial environment. It's very, very different from other forms of aquaculture where they're growing a fish that grows there, but in pens, and introducing some of those water quality issues, but then with a lower energy footprint. So there's certainly those trade-offs, and we talked a little bit about that, about how there's more of a tradition of having these, you know, very low energy facilities, but that do have these water quality impacts. And, you know, what they're doing is essentially completely different from what people are used to in the aquaculture realm. People are used to seeing, you know, fish grown in hatcheries, but not necessarily in this type of environment. And so that is, you know, certainly a consideration is the energy. And we just didn't get into the brass tacks about what the energy bills were and the elements, but they were able to procure 100% renewable energy from their public power company. So that's one thing. And they also expressed interest in the addition. The wind energy element was really interesting because there are turbines everywhere, but they're not that close together. I mean, there are some installations of multiple turbines, both offshore and onshore there, but a lot of them were more spaced out, which was intriguing to me because I don't really understand the transmission infrastructure and the storage infrastructure that involves. But there's like one wind turbine, you know, every, you know, 5 miles. It's like they're everywhere, but they're isolated mostly. And so the ones that you saw in the pictures of the facility were publicly owned wind turbines, but apparently companies can help invest in some of the process of getting one, and then essentially ensure that some of their energy production is local and from that that particular turbine. So they were exploring investing in that particular form of energy production, but the process to actually add additional turbines is quite lengthy, and there's a lot of permitting involved. So I thought that was interesting that they're trying to and willing to invest in additional wind energy production, you know, that in part would be dedicated to their facility. And I will also add a disclaimer that that was my understanding of it. And there was a little bit, everyone's English was phenomenal, but there was a little bit lost in translation. So if I get any of the facts wrong, you know, please take it with a grain of salt. I'm providing the information to the best of my understanding.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll go to the public, and we'll go to Zoom first, and we have one hand up, 7718. This is your chance to talk on this item. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate going over there and getting some information. I was strongly in favor of this project and was hoping to see it come to fruition, but I know they may be proceeding with some permits and things, but it's close to 3 strikes against this project. One of the biggest strikes is it's in the United States and it's in California. This process, and the process is so expensive here compared to third world countries, I can't see how this will come to fruition now. Everybody I talk to on the international basis, if they're honest, are saying we're heading toward an international recession. Even the very well-funded companies like Nordic are pulling back at this time and moving really slow on things. My understanding is their main facility is no longer moving forward. I could be corrected if I'm wrong about that. Maybe John Ford knows more about that than I do. But my understanding was they have an easement in the wrong location and are not able to move forward. So I really wish that we as local people would do more with our own fishery and try and revive that and put some money into that and convince your people with the California government to go ahead and I'm not really in favor of the hatcheries as much as the boxes they put into different things where they move the eggs in different areas and they actually hatch in those areas. I think if we really work on revitalizing, removing dams, revitalizing our fishery, we would have a lot better product and we could feed a lot more people and we would have just about 0 carbon imprint. The energy use on these facilities is just through the roof. So I'm sorry to have to be negative on this one, but I cannot see it moving forward. Along with, it's been mentioned, the new Fish and Wildlife is not going to allow them to have Atlantic salmon, so they're always looking for other species here, and of course, then you have to find the market for it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this topic.
Thank you, Speaker. Seeing no other hands up in Zoom, we'll go to those here in the audience today that might like to come up and speak on this particular item. Please step forward. This is your chance. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll bring it back to the board. Any final discussion or a motion?
I'll move that we accept this report.
Second.
Moved by Supervisor Wilson and seconded by Supervisor Bushnell to receive the report. And I believe we're still doing a roll call. Okay. And vote tabs are up. Everybody got them?
Okay, great. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you. All right, and with that, we'll move on in our agenda to item H1, form an ad hoc working group to review the County of Humboldt strategic plan. And I imagine CAO Hayes has a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair Madrone. We last did strategic planning in 2019, and much has changed across the organization since that time. So we have lifted up the strategic planning with your board and department heads. We met over 3 full days in the month of March, 1 day which was in Trinidad and 2 days which was in Benbow. These locations were selected to both offer the further north and further south of the county an opportunity to participate, but also was specifically designed to remove the board and department heads from the hustle and bustle of the office environment and your daily work so that we could focus our energy and time during those meetings. I think your board, or I hope your board, and I'm fairly confident that department heads found this work to be effective and meaningful. And during the time at Benbow, your board and department heads did identify some specific focus areas and began to develop some more detailed tasks to address those focus areas. And now what we would like to do is pull together a working group comprised of your board, department heads, and maybe some potential senior leadership in the organization to flush those ideas out and formulate more robust and defined action plan to implement a new strategic plan. So with that, I throw it to your board to discuss which of the two of you would like to participate in that process. We will return at a later date to present to the public that fleshed out process, as the working group will also make some recommendations on the public engagement process to be recommended as we work through the strategic planning effort.
Thank you, CIO Hayes. And yes, I think that the 3 meetings we've had so far have been very robust, and there is great value in getting everybody out of Eureka. I think if we had tried to do these meetings in Eureka, people would have been drawn off to their duties, frankly speaking. And I was very impressed by the continuous engagement of the board and the department heads throughout the entire 3-day process. And I think that was due to yours and staff's help in the process, and Robert Bendorf, and frankly, just being out of town to where it wasn't so easy to jump back into your workload that never ends, basically. So I think that was an investment well worth the outcome. And in addition, while it was limited public engagement at that stage we've had so far, we do intend to have a robust engagement with the public as we further this draft strategic plan and then ultimately finalize it here at the board. So for those members of the public that are wanting to be involved, we will have details on that coming up in the not too distant future on how that will work. So thank you for that presentation. Any questions from the board? Any thoughts? No? Supervisor Wilson?
I think there's Supervisor Bushnell as well.
I think she said no.
Oh, well, I volunteer.
Okay, fantastic. We have 1 volunteer. Do we have a second volunteer?
I'll do it. I mean, I don't know if there are others that would be interested, but.
Supervisor Bohn?
I'll make a motion to accept Supervisor Wilson and Supervisor Arroyo to be on the ad hoc, take us into the future committee.
Second.
We have a motion by Supervisor Bohn and a second by Supervisor Bushnell to appoint Supervisor Arroyo and Supervisor Wilson to the ad hoc committee. Supervisor Wilson?
There was a request by staff to also maybe put some staff members on there as well, but is that something that we could just do and bring back to the board, or do you want us to like have a more robust discussion about that?
So my plan is to speak with department heads on Thursday to gauge their interest in participating in this process, and also to weigh whether or not they think some of their senior leadership would be value adding to that process as well. So we are working on that. That said, I would welcome any of your board to come talk with me after the meeting and let me know if you have any specific ideas of who you might want on that.
Okay, so my assumption moving forward that is if this vote moves forward the way that it is, that Supervisor Arroyo and I will then meet with you, sort of discuss what our interface is with relationship to the department heads.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted, clarification.
Great. Okay, seeing no other comments here at the board, we'll take it out to the public. And do we have any hands up in Zoom?
We do, Chair Madrone. First caller is 7718.
7718, this is your chance to speak about the ad hoc committee and the, that we're forming for the strategic plan. Welcome.
Can you,
Yep.
can you hear me?
Yes?
Rex, you and I were last people standing, I think, here back in the day. And this was back when Mark Love was on vacation and we had slideshows for about 30 minutes. But back in the day, we used to do the strategic planning thing, if I recall, in a little conference room, probably 2 hours, 3 hours at the most is what it took. I was usually the only public participant in that particular process. It seems to have ballooned into quite a big ordeal. I'm not sure whether we can afford the luxury of people getting away from their jobs and hard tasks. A lot of your staff, my understanding, were multitasking down there while they were doing it one way or another. The public, of course, I think maybe 3 people or 4 participated and so on, so there's no reason for the public to be accommodated there. I'm not aware of anybody in Trinidad, but I could be wrong. I'd be pleased to hear if somebody actually from the public attended that. It'd be interesting to see what kind of public participation you now have. I did a public records request, and I have to apologize for some of those, but I came up with a real interesting receipt for the 2019 one, and it was for 2 white noise machines. 2 machines that are supposed to make you be able to go to sleep okay. Well, I guess maybe those can be recycled to the 2 people on the ad hoc committee. But it was kind of alarming to me to see something like that being produced by a public record request in conjunction with expenses that were allotted off to the strategic planning. So for many of us, these meetings are boring enough to put us to sleep without a little machine. So anyway, I hope you do take public participation to heart. I hope you don't just want us to rubber stamp your thing, because I think you'll find that there's a lot of us out there that are not happy with what's going on in the party, the direction we're going. Sounds like Thomas Mulder's not happy with the way many things are going, and many of the people are also not happy. And I'm not speaking for all the people, but frequently speak to me about not being happy on your strategic plan and everything we're doing. Thank you for the opportunity to speak again.
Thank you, commenter. And next we have 3053, *6 to unmute. Welcome.
Good morning, Thomas Mulder here. I just want to confirm you can hear me still.
Yes, we can, Thomas.
Thank you. So yes, I did see those agenda items about the strategic planning. Unfortunately, I had pre-planned appointments, so I was unable to participate in those 2 meetings you guys had. It would be nice in the future that you come out with those dates 30 days in advance, so those of us that are super short-staffed and super beyond overworked, we can try to pencil that into our monthly calendar and figure out what we could sacrifice to participate. But I'll tell you what, if you guys go forward with this motion on the table, that's the most terrifying thing ever out there. Supervisor Wilson on strategic planning, the king of anti-sprawl. That's pretty scary. So I'm going to ask one of you 3 other supervisors that are more rural districts, please put your hand up and change the motion on the table, because I personally believe we're a little more rural than we are urban, but maybe I'm wrong. And if that goes forward as planned, please, like I said, give us a 30-day notice, so that way we can work it into our calendar, so that way things that are happening in the climate action plan, which I'm told one of the supervisors directly communicates with, I'm really want to be really cautious and make sure the public is notified. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, commenter. And with that, we'll bring it here to those in the audience today. If any of you would like to speak on this item, this is your chance to come forward. And we do have one member of the public coming forward.
Am I on?
Welcome.
So my name is Juan Pablo Cervantes. I'm the clerk recorder and registrar of voters. I want to speak a little about the process and a little bit about the previous strategic plan. When departments put an agenda item forward to this board, we denote where in the strategic plan that item is going to move us forwards on. In elections, that's a very creative process. The current strategic plan doesn't have a lot of room for us. I imagine that has to do with the small room in which that plan was developed and who was at that table. Going through this process over the previous 3 days, I entered into that very skeptically. My past experience with such processes was, I felt like it was a waste of time. This instance of strategic planning really changed my mind entirely on that. I saw a group of different individuals heading different parts of the county, all critical to this county working for its constituents, come together and really put forward something that was representative of all of us, where when we acted on the county's behalf, we could align it to this direction, this strategic plan. I just wanted to thank you all for participating, and to thank the CAO, Alicia Hayes, for organizing it and organizing it in the way that she did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cervantes, Clerk Recorder. Yeah, my observations were the same, that we really had tremendous engagement by all the department heads and the board for 3 solid days, and it was a well worthwhile effort for a small expense. Any other comments here? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Profont. Some of you know who I am. I wasn't planning on speaking today, but thank you for hearing my comment. Regarding the strategic plan, I think the topics of interest, which I'm going to put forth with you, hopefully within the time limit allotted, could be included and speaks to the idea of the registrar of voters. My husband and I and my daughter have been disenfranchised from voting in Humboldt County, California, as a result of our properties being seized as a result of unlawful foreclosures. And one of the things that's very important for you to all know is that oftentimes the foreclosure that occurs doesn't have anything to do with a contract. It has to do with fraud. And a foreclosure has to stand in order for it to get prosecuted. So think of the position that puts in a paramount title holder's world. You're trying to protect your home. People are committing fraud. People are using the courts to commit fraud. And then the police are put out there who have no training as attorneys. So in the interest of public safety, I hope that you might put this on your strategic plan, because it's affecting who is paying taxes and who is voting and who is running for office. I've been asked to run for office, both on the Board of Supervisors and in the city of Ferndale, and I haven't known how to register to do so. How does somebody do that when their property is being occupied by people who are actually ignoring the rule of law to be there? So, to the point, when I was downstairs today, I was trying to get access to the public law library. I also direct the Tahoe Foundation, which is inspired by the place, but it's actually about architectural research. And I was trying to access the library today to do some research on behalf of the foundation. And that law library has been inaccessible to the public. I know that the DA used to serve on that board. I went to the DA's office. They didn't know the first thing about it. I went to the head of court operations. They didn't know the first thing about it. Tony, who actually mans the security desk down there to get into the building, he knew about it. He is using it as a break room. I was able to actually have him contact Stephanie, who knows me, and I was allowed to be ushered in until she realized I'm not an attorney. I don't have an attorney's card. The last time I stood in front of a judge and I said, all these people want me to become an attorney, I said, I have no interest in being an attorney. He said, you know, I used to be an attorney. I don't want to be an attorney anymore either. I can understand. So how does somebody like me get access to that law library? And the last point I'm going to bring up is the last time I was in that law library, there were no assessor's handbooks. It's very important to put monuments in a context regarding taxation and historic preservation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else here today? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board, and we have a motion and a second on the table. Any other comments? Yes, Supervisor Wilson? Go ahead, Supervisor Bushnell.
I just want to say that we have done these strategic planning processes in the past. They are a tool for how we look to the future with relationship to how we move forward at all levels, whether it's land use planning or public health or environmental health or all of the issues, even administrating and providing services to the community at large. It's helpful for an organization to set its sights, its goals, and priorities. One of the things we have to always remember when we're doing this is if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. And so this process really helps us in that discussion. And ultimately, every decision maker and really every person who works for this organization all wants health, happiness, and prosperity for all of our citizens. Frankly, what we disagree on and what we discuss here on the dais often is just the strategy. So that's why it's important to have this strategic framework. So, thanks.
Thank you. Supervisor Bushnell.
Thank you. CAO Hayes, I would just like for clarification that when we form ad hocs, they bring items or suggestions back to this board, and then the entirety of this board makes a decision based on that plan. If you could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. They are a representative of the board as a body in that process, and will help us to, flesh out something that we can bring back that, ideally is commensurate of the full board. But that said, whatever comes back to the full board is at the full board's discretion.
And at that time that it would come back, if we have the opportunity to flesh out changes and make suggestions according to this board's wishes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Yes, Supervisor Arroyo.
I'd also note that the notes taken from our strategic planning session, which were inclusive of almost all of our department heads and our full board, are going to be the basis for the further fleshing out of this. So everyone who participated in that had a chance to kind of outline some of those priorities. So I hope that helps to articulate kind of how it's inclusive of our a more wide array of our leaders.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we have our voting tabs up. We'll go ahead and vote.
Thank you. Motion passes 5-0.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, and now we are going to go to item H2, Evergreen Exotic Zoning Code Amendment Petition. Director Ford, please.
Thank you, Chair Madrone. Good morning. John Ford, Stephen Santos, and Cliff Johnson to present a request for a petition to amend the zoning ordinance. The amendment would be to allow acceptance of an application to change the cannabis provisions within the zoning ordinance to allow indoor cultivation within the business park zone. There's some concern that's been expressed that processing this text modification at the request of an applicant could appear to favor the amendment. And I just wanted to say that any action that the board were to take today to allow processing the application, even though the applicant would be paying for it, is not in any way indicative of the board's support for the petition or the application. It's really a question of whether or not the board wants to pursue this amendment and finds it to be consistent with the general plan and in the public interest. I'm going to ask Mr. Santos now to give you a brief presentation on the specifics of this request.
Thank you, Director Ford. All right, so it looks like my PowerPoint is successfully being shared. Director Ford already gave a summary of what the petition process is. This petition is proposing a process to amend the commercial cannabis land use ordinance to allow indoor cultivation in business park zones, MB zones. This would potentially affect only the inland area, and the potential effect would be 32 parcels totaling approximately 55 acres. Under the current local cannabis program, cannabis distribution, off-site processing, enclosed nurseries, community propagation, and manufacturing are currently allowed in MB zones. Indoor cultivation was previously allowed under 1.0 in MB zones, but that eligibility did not carry over in the migration to 2.0. In researching why this eligibility didn't carry over, I was unable to determine a clear legislative history. However, there was some anecdotal evidence that there was some concern that if indoor cultivation was allowed in MB zones, there might be odor impacts in buildings that had multiple tenants or suites. So if the board does move forward with this process, one of the things the board may want to consider is looking at specific performance standards related to odor if indoor cultivation is allowed again in MB zones. To grant the petition, the board needs to make 3 findings. That it's within public interest, that it's consistent with the general plan, and that it does not reduce residential density below the inventory adopted in the housing element. With regard to public interest, making this change could help the local cannabis industry adapt to evolving conditions. Having adequate transportation facilities, access to existing PG&E power drops are some of the site constraints that the local industry confronts. Parcels located in business park zones have paved roads, Category 4, meeting Category 4 or equivalent standards, have existing power drops. So I think it is arguable, staff believes it's arguable that this petition is within the public interest. With regard to consistency with the general plan, this would fall under what is known as a similar compatible use type per the land use element of the general plan. And out of the 32 parcels that could potentially be affected, 24 have a CS or commercial services land use designation, and then the other 8 have both a CS and an IG, industrial general land use designation. Both of these designations allow for similar compatible uses. Staff analysis concluded that indoor cultivation could operate without impact to or from other allowable use types. And indoor cultivation is very similar to existing allowable cannabis uses already, such as nurseries. With regard to the finding of residential density, there aren't any parcels that are MB zoned that are part of the inventory in the housing element. And if this change were to happen, it wouldn't change any of the eligibility criteria for housing development currently allowed in MB zones. For example, caretaker units are allowed, apartments on upper floors are allowed, and transitional housing is allowed. That would not be affected by this potential change. So this petition is not a project under CEQA. And so the staff recommendation is for the board to adopt the resolution and find the petition meets the criteria specified in the zoning ordinance, and direct the clerk of the board to give notice to proper parties. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Any clarifying questions from the board at this time? Supervisor Wilson.
I saw that there was issue about the electrical drop, and so I was just sort of wondering, it seems to me that with the issues around electricity and delivery, is there a potential that this could impact, have a impact on other future uses in the area?
The site that this is really emanating from has existing power to the site. The property owner believes that they would be able to have adequate power to support this at that location. It's something we can look into more, but at this time it's our understanding that it would not affect other properties or the ability of other uses on this property.
Well, what I mean by this is the particular project that this is sort of teed off of is one drop associated with that, but then there's 50 acres of, isn't that right, of potential change in terms of the 30 parcels or something, 30 some odd parcels?
Right. That's really, I think, in primarily 2 different business parks with multiple lots within each of them.
All right. how many are in the business park area down, and how many acres in the business park area in southern Humboldt?
I think that's probably about, just rough proportionality, about 40% of that.
Okay.
The other parks in McKinleyville, it is
Oh,
far
okay.
bigger.
So even if it's, I don't know, 20 acres more, it's still, are we accounting for that? You see what I'm saying? Like, that all could convert because of the zone change. And so then, is there analysis around that?
So as part of doing the zoning, we are aware of the concern with the PG&E power, and it's something that we would absolutely need to take a look at and assess whether or not that's an environmental impact or not.
Will we do that on a project-by-project basis?
No, we do it as part of the ordinance.
Okay.
Supervisor Bushnell.
Thank you through the chair. Director Ford, because I think your department is recognizing the power issues that are currently happening today in southern Humboldt, but hopefully there'll be a solution in the future. Is your department clarifying whether there is power at an application site already existing to the amount that would be needed for a project, or how are you guys mitigating that?
It's a good question. We, at this point, have to be aware of power on everything that we do in southern Humboldt, whether it be a land use zoning or a project-specific impact. So those are things that we're evaluating as part of the initial application.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that. And then also, I think some of this change came up. There's a weird little thing that happened down there. One side of the street is zoned. You can do this. The other side of the street is zoned this different. Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
I think what you're referring to is a portion of the park down there actually has industrial zoning. Which,
The left side, yeah.
yeah, which would allow
Yeah.
indoor cultivation.
Do you know why because that is one business park up there, and do you know why the different zoning?
I do not know the history on that.
So, and it's pretty contiguous through there as far as like the left side that you can currently do this, just goes right across, same structure, same everything, but the zoning was different. Is that correct?
That is my recollection. I'm looking at, I'm trying to pull it up right now.
I
to
can confirm.
Okay.
Sorry. But, okay, I just was, it was a weird thing when I was looking at it that it's zoned so different on the same streets. So thank you for that.
If I could, just to
Sure.
be clear, the other side of Evergreen is C3, which does allow indoor cultivation. MB does not.
Sure, and I saw that as well.
Yeah.
So, so this would, okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, comments here at the, Supervisor Wilson.
Well, it's just so for, I guess, sort of the public's benefit with relationship to just the simplification of this. This is not a vote to approve an ordinance that does this. This is a vote to accept a petition to start that process, which really is whether or not we feel like it's a priority of our institution to spend time and effort to do this. I think that especially when we have staff levels and issues associated that, even though it gets paid for by the applicant, this is one of those situations where that's really what we're being asked. All right, thanks.
Okay, at this point, we'll go to public comment, and we'll go to Zoom first, and we have one hand up, 7718. This is your chance to comment. There you go, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Steve here. So what you're approving is not an approval, it's just to see whether you want to go down the pathway to 50 acres potentially of additional indoor grow. I don't know whether the general plan, especially the energy part to deal with energy thing, is really compatible with having more. I mean, how about you've got a whole great big old area of it already approved that's not being used, and now we're trying to add more to it. Hopefully it won't be used for that, but I'm just curious, in the process, does this get a full EIR as far as the environmental impact of 50 more additional acres of potential indoor growth, and the energy consumption, there seems to be major things including water usage and all kinds of things that could go with 50 acres more. I'm not having a problem with accepting the petition if they're going to pay for a new staff person or something like this. The staff is not overburdened with this, and the person's willing to go forward. But it seems to me like this would be a rather expensive process. I doubt whether you can get by with a mitigated negative debt if you can mitigate all the concerns that will be coming forward regarding a 50-acre indoor grow. We don't have any here, but again, I would like to see one here. I think that's a thing of the past. I think public perception is we should not be encouraging high energy use indoor growth in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I would actually like to see that totally stricken from the fire cannabis thing. Should you ever have a 2.5 or a 3.0 on that? That's the current trend as far as outlook for the environment. Thank you, not you, speaker.
Thank you, commenter, and we'll bring it here to the audience. Anybody here today who would like to speak on this item, please step forward. Seeing no one here, we'll bring it back to the board. Supervisor Bohn.
And maybe I'm the one that's confused on this. Of the 52 acres, 35 or 40 acres is already occupied by businesses that are already, we're not approving 52 acres of inside grow, because I don't think the DMV is going to grow. I don't think the farm supply store is going to start growing in their back room. So is that, am I missing something? It's encompassing 52 acres because it's a footprint.
Yeah, the footprint of the zoning district is 52 acres.
And when this was built, and God, when Johnson's and them built that, part of the issue was cultivation was nowhere near being legal or anything else, but I think they separated because they wanted certain, if there were hardcore industrial businesses, pounding, beating, fabricating, the motorcycle fabrication shop, the car fabrication shop, they're all on the industrial side. So you could still do retail on the other side. I think it was a noise element. I think that they were concerned about, if I remember right, but it was initiated 40 years ago, 35 years ago when this first started, because we had a business basically across the street from it, so we were excited about it. So what they're doing now, and the driving force behind this is somebody that has a building that already has a power drop. Are we going to have problems power dropping to this? Oh, hell yes. I mean, for future development, that's going to be something that comes in front of us and says, yeah, you can do it, but you can't get the power until the power situation changes. So that's going to curtail itself. So basically, we have one applicant that is driving the bus to change this because they have a venue. They have obviously purchased a venue that they think they can operate with the power that's there now. They're not asking for increased power. Am I somewhat being right, or am I getting confused here?
You haven't said anything that's incorrect.
Okay, so I don't see an issue with this. I mean, I know we can scream that it's, indoor cannabis, and I don't really care. I mean, it's just, I have people that have fish allergies, and they haven't called in about indoor fish. So, I mean, which is going to be a power use. So I think what they're doing is it's just the evolution of the business park, which has been, it seems to me, just with everything up there that can do this, and everything's all paved, no dirt roads, everything else, it's near housing and Garberville and things like that. It looks like do you see anything major with, I mean, you guys have suggested that we approve it. Do you see any issues?
Well, I think the biggest issue really is how we're going to address the PG&E issue, and there's going to have to be clarification on that. The other environmental factors associated with use of buildings or even constructing a new building in a piece of property that's zoned to MB, which largely have already been subdivided. As Mr. Santos said, they already have all utilities. Whether or not there's sufficient power there or not is the question. Whether most of or all the lots, I think, are within a CSD, so there should be sufficient water. And it really does just come down to understanding whether or not there's sufficient power to support that.
And this, the one that's driving this, but you'll ferret out all the rest, is an existing building that somebody's actually going to occupy and put people into work, right? Is this an existing building with the power drop
I'm
already
not-
in?
I think he's got an existing power drop to a site that had a building on it, but is there currently a building there? Okay.
And he's going to utilize the building that's there?
Yep.
Wow, okay, thanks.
Okay, seeing no other, Supervisor Bushnell, excuse me.
Thank you. So also, just speaking about the power issue, you know, PG&E is not going to hook anybody up that, until there is a solution to the power issues that are going on in southern Humboldt. We've already seen that, have been dealing with it, Director Ford, I think, for almost a year now, right? And I do understand the issues that could come from, you know, we don't want to take power that someone else or a home or, you know, could be using. But the bottom line is there isn't any power down there right now. They're not getting it, whether we do this change or not, unless there is already established power to the site, which I would hope that he has done his due diligence and contacted PG&E and had that discussion. Because if he hasn't, then the building's not going to get the power. Also, you know, with the decline of things that are going on around southern Humboldt, this area is largely empty. A lot of empty buildings up there, a lot of standing empty buildings. So, you know, we could use some additional stuff going on in southern Humboldt. And I think with this zoning application change, that it could open up some things. Doesn't have to be cannabis, but just open up some things, as Supervisor Bohn had said, for heavier industrial. There's a lot of empty buildings up in this Evergreen currently, and I frankly would welcome any kind of growth down there. So thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, we're looking for a motion. Supervisor Arroyo?
I'm sorry, I did have a question.
Please.
To some of the points that were raised, what is your take on how labor intensive this change would be?
In terms of modifications to the ordinance, it's a matter of it adding an M and a B into
Right.
one section of the ordinance. And then it's really about, they'll require some thought and some finesse to figure out how to address the power issue from an environmental standpoint.
So would you be analyzing the power issue on a per applicant basis or as a part of the whole reclassification? Sorry if
No, that's a fair question.
that's not clear.
I think what I've tried to say is that I think we need to address it as part of the zoning.
Okay.
To determine whether or not there's an environmental effect associated from making this change and allowing new indoor uses in areas, particularly in southern Humboldt, where it would generate additional power demand, where that capacity may not or does not exist.
Okay, so the text amendment piece is really simple,
Right.
but it's the that element that will be a little bit more complex, and then obviously your staff report says, then there's conferral processes with different agencies about the reclassification. So, I mean, I see that you're recommending it, so I think that really handles most of my questions. But I'm conscious of your staff's enormous workload.
I appreciate that. And I just would like to add, as Mr. Santos briefly pointed out, that, we went back and why did that somehow not get carried forward as an allowed use in the MB? Because it was clearly there in the CCLUO, or the CMMLUO, pardon me. And there's not a good answer to that.
Supervisor Bushnell and then Supervisor Wilson.
Thank you. Two things. So while this is two sites, right, McKinleyville and Southern Humboldt, we don't seem to be talking about any power use in the McKinleyville area because it's not an issue. Hopefully in the future, this won't be an issue in the Southern Humboldt area. I don't anticipate that we won't have a solution coming forward, which Pacific Gas and Electric has said we're working on solutions, so that will be great. And then also, when I was looking at it, like Director Ford just said, there wasn't really a reason why it was zoned differently on one side and not the other. Anyways, I'm very comfortable with this moving forward, and I'll make a motion for staff approval.
So we have a motion, is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second, and so Supervisor Wilson, additional discussion?
I assume that this moves forward, the analysis would also look at, because there are restrictions around setbacks in the current ordinances, and so we would be looking at to see if there was potential things that couldn't occur in that zoning that maybe are allowable now. And then also, so we want to make sure that we evaluate what restrictions might be there. But then the other thing is, if the point is to allow more flexibility and thus more economic opportunity within that space, this ordinance would only do one thing, right? Or this potential change only do one thing. And maybe this is an opportunity to take a look at how we might expand opportunity through other changes within that space. You know, in terms of flexibility and in terms of what we believe, you know, the trend these days is to make zonings more flexible and around creativity and mixed use, and maybe this is an opportunity to take a look at that, because this is only looking at one opportunity in change, and I think that we owe it to our communities, especially those stressed with these changes that are occurring right now, to really think of how we might create more opportunity. If you have your thoughts on that.
I absolutely have thoughts on that. It's always opportune to take a look at doing things like allowing mixed use, which is something you mentioned there, that could be incorporated into this discussion. That's typically not something that's in the business park vocabulary, just because some of the uses aren't necessarily always compatible with residential uses. But have no objection to taking a look at that if that's the will of the board.
So would that take
I think it'd be better to have it part of the motion.
Okay. How would you suggest that language be? And this would be a suggestion to the motion maker in the second.
So I'm going to basically use the language that you just offered, which was to look at opportunities to create more flexibility to allow mixed uses and other activities that could be incorporated into the MB zone that would benefit the community.
Is that something you'd consider?
Okay, Supervisor Bushnell?
So my first question would be, through the chair, thank you, is Director Ford. So currently, under the current zoning up there, especially since we seem to be concentrating on the southern Humboldt, not the entirety of the thing, can you, on that side that we're talking about currently, you could have a nursery currently under the zoning?
Yes.
But you just can't cultivate, is that correct?
Correct.
So from my understanding from the new technology with indoor cultivation and the lights and all this and that, the same power uses would be used for the nursery as would be for cultivation. So it doesn't really change too much up there. It just allows for the cultivation that isn't in the ordinance in that zone, but he could do that applicant could do everything else up there. Except for cultivate, using the same amount of power currently without any changes. And then with, I just want to confirm, is that correct, John? Or
Yes.
Director Ford? Okay.
Yes.
And then also with Supervisor Wilson's suggestion, can you read it again, and what would is that going to, I suppose, add more work to your staff? But can you kind of flesh it out for me?
So really what it would be doing in a nutshell is looking to see whether or not we could create provisions to allow mixed use within the MB zones. And that would create additional opportunity to construct residences, housing. And I know there's a distinct difference between the Southern Humboldt example and the McKinleyville example. where McKinleyville has very few uses out there, and it would probably be fairly simple to do a mixed-use kind of development there. Southern Humboldt may be a little bit more constrained, may be a little bit more awkward, but I think I don't want to read into Supervisor Wilson's intent, but I've heard him say this before, which is to just create those opportunities. It doesn't mean that people have to do that. It just creates the opportunity to do that if the opportunity arises.
So with that being said, specifically for Southern Humboldt area, the park up there was built for non-residential, to keep the residential, to keep this kind of activity away from the residential, which would be the loud noises, the industrial type activities that people in residential areas don't really care for. Can you see in the future, if we allow mixed use up there, especially I'm talking about Southern Humboldt, creating a problem with residential and the activities that go on with heavy industrial? And could it, I can imagine, stop the heavy industrial activities or put a stamper on it up in the Southern Humboldt area?
So one of the things, and I can share my screen if it would be helpful to see it, that I want to make sure that I'm clear about, is that the zoning there is not heavy industrial. There is a zoning that's C3, which is heavy commercial.
Okay.
Which is predominantly retail but heavy retail related. And then the business park really is intended, the way the zone's structured, to be more kind of office, warehouse kind of structures. And I know that's not how it's built out.
So I live down there,
Yep.
and that is not how it is currently. And there's a lot of activities up in that area that, if I had a home there, would just frankly irritate me. And so I don't want to have, I would prefer for my community to not have the issues come forward with people that have bought properties up there for the intent of commercial activities to have to deal with, now you can't do that, or you have to exclude your hours of use. When they bought properties in an area that was intentional of that kind of activity, by mixing it with housing, then for a residential person to say, I don't like that noise, I don't like that logging truck starting at 3 in the morning. How would you see that play out?
I share that concern. I'm aware of that, and that's why I tried to say that it creates opportunity and not a requirement. And so if it's not conducive to developing a mixed-use kind of environment, typically people won't do that. But say in another example, out by the airport in McKinleyville, that may be far more conducive. It may be a better use of that property that doesn't seem to be quite moving as fast. And the traditional zoning paradigms from the 60s are to keep uses very separated, and that makes us more car reliant. Where we seem to be going from a land use planning standpoint is to bring things back closer together, which is where zoning was at the turn of the century, the 1900 turn of the century. And so that's really what this conversation is about, is opportunities.
So would it be then, if I was to add that to the motion, would you look at it by site and make that determination, or would it be automatic if we were to do that?
Well, one of the things we could look at is that, we could create a process or even performance standards by which the mixed use would be deemed accessible or acceptable. And if it's acceptable under those circumstances, that it could be a by right use or it could be a discretionary use. There are several different ways to look at it, and that would be something that, after we evaluated that for a little while, could probably have a more clear picture of what could be done.
So if I were to, thank you for that, if I were to make that amendment, then would it come back to this board before final decision?
Well, it could. That decision couldn't be made until the board takes action on it. I mean, this, if it ever does get approved, it's going to be by the board.
Right. I mean, you've heard my concerns. I'm just really very much concerned with the southern Humboldt area, especially. It sounds like Supervisor Wilson, do you know, or Supervisor Madrone, the McKinleyville site might be more appropriate for mixed use?
I will say on the McKinville site, there's been some suggestion that maybe, we're talking about the airport business park.
Yeah.
Steve Mosier's property, and there's been some suggestion that maybe a light tech kind of a retreat center for Palo Alto folks could be built there that would have residential in combination with that light tech. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities, and it's nice to have the flexibility that currently exists there. But this would add some additional flexibility into that. Now, that airport business park, does it allow residential currently or not?
Thank you for asking that question. The MB zone currently does allow residential uses with a conditional use permit.
Okay.
So then there's not a reason for that motion then?
Well, no, what this motion would do would be to look at situations where mixed use could be allowed by right rather than through a discretionary permit. It's currently allowed with a discretionary permit, but are there circumstances in which, as maybe the example that Chair Madrone just gave, that if it's some kind of a retreat center or, you know, work-live environment, that it's allowed by right?
So you can currently do it just with a discretionary permit?
Correct.
Then I'm not going to change my motion. Thanks. It's just going to add more work to the staff.
Okay. Okay, hang on. Mike, did you still want to go again? Yeah. So I got Supervisor Wilson, Supervisor Bohn, and then Supervisor Arroyo.
Yeah, there are actually methodologies by which you can protect commercial activities within these spaces, and those happen to be through by right agreements with relationship to, and we see this all the time. So in new developments, the adjacent uses have preeminence or the rights to operate, and we see this especially around commercial activities, certainly agricultural activities. We see that all the time, and around fisheries and those sorts of spaces. So those agreements are pretty common. They happen, and we do them often. And I will say that in small town environments, you already have plenty of residential areas that are around these types of activities. Certainly in downtown Garberville and Redway, you have residences that are near machine shops, well, not machine shops, but the commercial zone, which is downtown Garberville, which includes gas stations and the mechanics activities that occur in those spaces. And so proximity is there already in those mixed-use spaces. So it does exist. All I'm saying is that maybe we should just be really more creative or allow more creativity in these opportunities, in these spaces. They exist, and yeah, you're right. It was the very 60s paradigm of separating all of these things, and the trend these days is to try and bring these together where you will not have as much conflict. And the assumption that, you know, that everybody lives separate from these types of activities all the time, I think is being not questioned, but it's definitely, there's a challenge around that for sure. So that's all. I mean, if we don't accept that change in this moment, I mean, I could make an amending motion for that change, and if there's interest from another board member, we could do an amending motion, and I'm happy to make that amending motion.
Okay, I've got Supervisor Bohn, Supervisor Arroyo, and Supervisor Bushnell next. Okay, Supervisor Arroyo.
So my understanding of what Supervisor Wilson was suggesting was perhaps a little broader, and it sounds like we're conversing about whether residential could be appropriate here. Are there uses, other commercial uses that don't fit with the general plan CS designation and don't fit with the building business park zoning, that we would, you know, I think the idea of providing more flexibility and essentially upzoning parcels to allow for that in an area where there's been a lot of economic decline, frankly, sounds kind of appealing if there are types of other commercial uses as well that could be considered there. So is that, are there essentially things that are shut out right now besides housing?
We have not done that analysis of this zone, frankly. So that would be part of what if the motion were to be made, that's part of what we'd be looking at.
Okay, so what I was hearing was not just about residential, it was about other types of uses and whether there are things that can't happen now that could happen in the future, that frankly, it would just be a benefit. If we're gonna analyze this to consider benefiting the Southern Humboldt community, I guess my preference would be to analyze other types of uses that people may someday want there, to allow it to be as flexible as possible, because we recognize that there is a lot of instability there, and people are going to want to innovate. So that is something I'm interested in considering, which is what I heard. Maybe I'm interpreting a little in the discussion.
Supervisor Bushnell?
Thank you. So with that statement, you can currently do that with discretion, or what was, what, excuse me?
CUP, conditional use.
Yeah, is that correct, John? Or Dr. Ford?
To a greater or lesser extent, yes.
Yeah. So I understand the conversation. I am just, and Supervisor Wilson, there are things, and once again, we're concentrating on the Southern Humboldt area, but I don't think it's special intent for that area. But you're right, there are gas stations in downtown Garberville and downtown Redway. There aren't trucking yards. There aren't welding shops. There aren't that kind of activities that start at super early hours in the morning in downtown Redway, downtown Garberville, that people have bought their lands up there to do that specific activity. And while I understand and I would love for other opportunities to happen up there, I don't want it to preclude what's going on there currently and people have invested in. And I can see a problem. If there's a way to mitigate that, Dr. Ford, then I do think that adding opportunity is great. I just don't want people that have already made those investments in a business park to have to deal with in the future, okay, now you can't start your job until 6 o'clock in the morning because it's too noisy for this resident over there. Do you understand what I'm saying, suggesting? And I wanted to ask Director Ford how we could address that.
Yeah, I think that those kinds of things can certainly be addressed, and it can be put into the ordinance to protect both sets of uses and all types of uses. One of the things I want to caution this discussion about, though, is that if we were, and this is not a reason not to do this, I just want the board to be fully aware, that if we expand the scope of the request, that then that's being done on the county's dime. That's not the applicant's obligation to pay for that.
Yeah, and I would have made that. So I guess I would clearly want to ask you, do you think this is a good idea? And how much staff time and are you guys capable right now?
We are capable. It really all comes down to being paid to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Well, I'm asking about capacity, and we're dealing with budgets right now, and so I'm asking your opinion whether this at this time is something that you think is a good idea going forward.
So I'm going to answer two separate questions there. Is it a good idea? Most of our zoning districts are rather archaic, and so revisiting a zoning district as we have rise to look at things, to modify things, is a good idea. It's a bit piecemealing, but where we can improve things along the way, that is a good idea. Then it's just really a matter of marshaling our resources to be able to do that and fit this in within the other priorities that we have within the county. And our long-range planning team has some very clear and definite priorities that this would not go in front of.
Okay, with that being said, if I do the modification, and obviously this came from an applicant, is this going to slow this applicant down, this process?
It would need to, yes.
So then we're not accomplishing what this applicant brought forward.
I got you.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, to reevaluate a district requires a little bit of work, and I don't want to be disingenuous about that. And so that becomes something that will take more time, even if I were to allocate staff to just work on this. It's going to take more time to do that than just focus on whether or not indoor cannabis cultivation should be allowed in the MB zone or not. So I'm not going to tell you an untruth and say that all things being equal, it can be done at the same speed, because there's more work involved in the addition of the motion.
Do you have a suggestion, since he's, this is on his dime for requesting this, and to accomplish both?
Given the fact that one is a modification to the CCLU and one is a modification to the district, we could split the baby and do them separately.
So I would be okay with that motion.
Okay, and I've still got a queue here going, and I just wanted to ask a clarifying question myself. This applicant could proceed right now, but with a conditional use permit?
No.
Okay, it's not allowed.
It's not allowed.
It's not allowed use, okay. No. I've got Supervisor Wilson and then Arroyo.
I want to speak to the concern with relationship to the sort of like conflict of use, but I also want to say that if we're already having landowners that have buildings that are already unoccupied and not being used, I'm thinking like in aggregate, we're talking about allowing for entitlements and expansion of entitlements. We hear so much often about property rights all the time, and here we are talking about expanding property rights. That is what we're really talking about. Well, actually talking about expansion of entitlements. And the potential that, and it's not just residential, it could be for education, there could be other uses within that space. Without an evaluation, we don't really know. And so I think that I think it is pretty important, because otherwise we're just piecemealing one part of one use for a whole zoning, and we would pass up an opportunity to really take a look at this expansion of uses or potential uses. I think if I was a property owner in this space, I would be personally, in a business zone. If I would, I would think this was pretty good. I don't know what the residential uses are in the area around this, and that would be part of that analysis. And I do think having two tracks to this is not such a bad idea. And then it just sets forth, how we look at that. And you may come back to us after a little bit of time looking at that and be like, well, you know what, we should look at all our industrial zones, or whatever it is. There might be a response that comes back after you guys do some analysis around that. But I think the thread is moving forward with more flexibility and opportunity within these spaces. So that I still would like to add this in as part of the motion, so we can expand on that.
Okay, so I've got 3 more supervisors in the queue. I want to encourage us to see if we can't wrap this up. We've had 4 or 5 bites at the apple here. And I do believe that I heard Supervisor Bushnell say that she would be willing to consider an amended motion that had 2 tracks. One would be to approve this request here today, and the other would be to direct staff to look at the broader implications. So I heard that. Is the seconder in agreement with that suggested change to the motion? And then I'll get back to the queue.
I have a pretty good grasp of the obvious, so yes, I will do that.
Okay, so we've got an amended motion and a second, and then my cue is Supervisor Arroyo, Bohn, and Bushnell. Okay, so I'm taking Bohn back out. So we've got a Supervisor Arroyo.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to take a moment to put a finer point on, the way this has come forward. I don't think it's, I understand that it's based on one applicant's, personal, private interests, which they would be therefore paying for the processing of the application that pertains to their business. But since this does affect, 32 parcels in multiple places in the county, I don't know that I see it as responsible to look at it just with the lens of that particular use. So I do think this is an opportunity, as Director Ford said, to look at, look at this zoning and consider what it could look like in the future. So I'm excited for that opportunity. I think the 2 tracks option is a perfectly good compromise. I just, I do think, when I think about the areas where these parcels are, it does feel like there is a lot of need to think creatively about what those could be in the future. So I'm in favor of that, and I'm not sure exactly what the language would be. And I wanted to ask Director Ford if you had some gentle suggestions about the way to frame that as two tracks.
Well, as the motion maker, so I, 2 comments. I recognize what Supervisor Wilson says, and yes, I agree. However, I do want to protect the current landowners there as well, and property owners. And so I think that as we're hearing, we can do both. I also think that the motion, or the petitioner, is the reason that this item got looked at and uplifted, and so I want to protect that person as, he is paying for this application. And I think, Director Ford, can you confirm that because of this, you looked around to other areas because of his interest?
At what the other MB zonings are, yes.
Correct. So because he had this request, then you said, well, let's do more than just his single request and look around.
We did that because when you change the CCLUO, it affects all the MB zones.
Correct. So I want to split the motion so that the petitioner can be addressed, and then and I do agree with Supervisor Arroyo and Wilson that, there could be some great opportunities. So what does that look like? Because Nikki's going to need help with that.
So I would offer that and I can type this up and send it to you, Nikki, too, that the motion to approve the petition to modify the CCLUO to allow the MB zoning district to accommodate indoor cultivation. And a second action that the Board of Supervisors direct staff to evaluate the MB zone to determine whether or not there are other economic development opportunities that could be achieved with a modification by adding flexibility to the uses allowed within the zone, which may include mixed use and other related uses that would be beneficial within the MB zone moving forward. Sorry, that was a little bit clumsy, but I'll clean it up.
It lays it out in detail.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for that. And so the motion maker is fine with that, and the seconder?
If I wasn't, it wouldn't matter, so yes.
So we've got a motion that's been amended and described in detail, along with a second, and I think we've had robust discussion. Yes, please, Supervisor Bohn.
I know you don't know off the hand, but what is not allowed in an MB? I mean, because I know the McKinneyville property has some restrictions because of the hotel was built about what, you're not going to get manufacturing, Mr. Mosier was very wise when he did that. You can have, there's other ventures looking at it, I understand, but none of them are manufacturing. I'm just concerned if one of the remaining lots of the, not counting the existing businesses out there, if we go in and put a 4-plex, a 6-plex, an 8-plex, I imagine the 2 lots on the other side are going to be pretty restricted on their hours of operation, noise levels, and things like that. And so, and then we take the whole venture of a business park out. And then the other thing is I'm wondering why the owners of the business parks haven't come to us with this, because I know it brought up property rights and things like that, and they haven't come first for this change because they seem to be, even in a down economy, they understand the restraints that they're working with. So we've gone from worried about how much time it's going to take to make sure it gets done my way. So as we change the avenues and things like that, I looked at this multiple times and made some phone calls, and I thought it was going to be a pretty simple process. But as we piecemeal the general plan into what they want, what it's going to be, what can't be in an MB just off the top of your head? I mean, I heard education and, but we should put health in there and homeless, but I don't know, so.
Well, you mentioned primarily industrial, but also I don't think that it allows retail uses. Or it's allowed with a use permit, so I was thinking by right uses. There are many things that are allowed with a conditional use permit.
What I'm saying is there are avenues to almost do anything you want up there but build a house.
You can even get a use permit right now to build a house.
To build a house. So, I mean, and we fight pretty hard when one of the biggest things we need is housing, and then unless it's 8 stories tall, we seem to fight housing when it gets in front of this body. So I just wondering.
Okay, our voting tabs are up. I think we've had a robust discussion. I appreciate everybody listening to each other's points of view. So let's go ahead and cast our votes.
My voting tab is not up, sorry. I'm trying to get there.
I can do a roll call.
Okay, please do.
Supervisor Bohn? Yes. Supervisor Arroyo?
Yes.
Supervisor Bushnell?
Yes.
Supervisor Wilson?
Yes.
And Supervisor Madrone?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries 5-0, and my screen just...
Excellent. That's very good. So we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break because the next item will take a little while. And it's the last item we have on the agenda for the day other than closed sessions at 2 o'clock. So we'll take a 10-minute break and we will be back here at 11:35 to our final agenda item. Okay, welcome back. We are live once again for our final agenda item other than closed sessions. And this is item I-1, an appeal of the zoning administrator's denial of a conditional use permit for 15,236 square feet of existing outdoor commercial cannabis cultivation for Abbey Road Farming LLC. Director Ford, do you want to begin, please?
Thank you, Chair Madrone. Good afternoon again, or I guess it is still morning. But you read the title of the appeal, so I won't go into that again. I'd just like to say that the Planning and Building Department has been attempting to work with applicants to have them complete their applications for cannabis cultivation. And in those situations where we've been unsuccessful in eliciting a response to make the application complete, we have been giving them 60 days to make it complete, or we would be scheduling it for hearing to deny the application.
Excuse me, Director Ford. Yes. I believe I was supposed to also open the public hearing. So please note that. Thank you.
Thank you. So to date, we have taken 58 applications forward for denial. There's several others on the agenda for the zoning administrator and planning commission this Thursday on the 20th. So this is the first one to have been appealed. And so to give you the specifics on that, I'm going to ask Mr. Santos to present the application.
All right, Mr. Santos.
Thank you, Director Ford. I've shared the PowerPoint via Zoom, so let's wait for that to get on the screen.
Here we
Terrific. Thank you very much. Okay. There we go. Since this is an appeal, this is a de novo hearing, so the board may receive new evidence and not rely exclusively on what's in the record. This appeal is of the February 16, 2023 zoning administrator denial of the Abbey Road Farming conditional use permit. On March 15th, an appeal was filed. I scheduled this item for denial in front of the zoning administrator because we had made 9 requests for information since February of 2017. This project had remained stuck in the very first step of the application process. It had not even been placed into referrals. We had no contact with anyone since August of 2021, and there was insufficient evidence in the project record to approve the project. We don't typically, we try and put things in referrals as close to when we receive the application, but if an application is so complete that we don't have an adequate project to describe, it's just a waste of time for the county and for referral agencies to receive a project because they don't have enough to actually review and comment on. A quick review of the appeal standard from Humboldt County Code. There's basically 3 criteria, and the question is whether any one of these criteria is present. Was the decision not in accord with the applicable standards, or was there an error, or was there an abuse of discretion? So that is the appeal standard. All right, these next few slides, I'm going to go through the appeal issues one by one. Appeal issue 1 is that a lack of a hydrologic study prevented staff from determining if there was adequate and eligible water. The appeal states there is not a well on the property, nor is there a proposed well. Staff response to the appeal is the September 2017 site plan identifies a proposed well, and the operations plan also identifies a proposed well as an irrigation source. So the zoning administrator decision was based on the information we had in the project record, which is in accord with the standards of this CMMLUO. And a copy of the site plan and the operations plan were included with the board report as attachments 5 and 6. Appeal issue 2 was a lack of a noise management plan prevented staff from determining if the energy source complies with noise standards given the proximity of northern spotted owl. There are approximately 3 mapped northern spotted owl activity centers within the vicinity. The closest one is about 3,900 feet away from the cultivation area. The appeal states the noise management plan is currently in press and can be submitted with additional documentation, and that there's no cultivation going on right now, and so there's no generator in use right now.
Bless you.
Bless you. Staff response to the appeal is that the appellant acknowledges that a noise management plan had not been provided. The fact that the generator is not currently being used is not relevant because a generator is proposed to be used, and evidence is required to evaluate whether use even for emergency purposes will comply with noise limits. So the zoning administrator was correct to find that the necessary findings under the CMMLUO could not be made. Appeal issue number 3 is that the lack of agency and tribal consultation prevented staff from proposing appropriate conditions. You can see what the appellant wrote. Previous documentation for the project did not include a required archaeological study. That is true, but we do refer every single cannabis project to local tribes. That had not been done. That could not be done because we didn't have adequate information. We also didn't have a check. We had asked for a replacement check. So staff response to the appeal is that the appellant acknowledges that the department had requested a check, so a referral could be sent to the tribes. Also, the appellant does not address or respond to the other deficiencies and items that were previously requested, such as updates and corrections to the site plan and the operations plan. So staff concludes on this issue that the zoning administrator was correct to find that the lack of agency and tribal consultation prevented staff from proposing appropriate permit conditions. Appeal issue number 4. There was insufficient evidence to support a finding that the project would not be detrimental to public health, safety, and welfare. This is a finding we have to make for every single permit. And this was due to no wetland delineation being in the project record, nor an environmental superiority analysis or restoration plan for the proposed on-site relocation. Therefore, staff was unable to determine if the project will cause any significant impact or provide mitigations consistent with the measures in the adopted M&D. The appeal states, and I'm summarizing here because there was a lot here in the appeal, basically that a wetland delineation was conducted, and they provided a copy of the wetland delineation was provided with the appeal on March 15th, 2023. The appeal further says that Pacific Watershed and Associates is completing the LSAA, and says that they believe the on-site relocation is superior, and commented that the relocation had already been conducted per advice early on in the permitting process. I didn't receive any documentation on that. The staff response to that is that the wetland delineation was not provided to the department until we actually got the appeal. And the appellant acknowledged that the requested information was not provided in a reasonable and timely manner. And the information provided by the appellant with the appeal still remains substantially incomplete. We still don't have the environmental superiority analysis or the restoration plan for the on-site relocation. So the staff conclusion is that the zoning administrator was correct to find there was insufficient evidence to find that the project was not detrimental. The appeal also describes some concerns or expresses some concerns related to noticing. The appeal claims that the applicant, owner, and agent did not receive the public hearing notice sent on February 1st, 2023. And then the appeal also states that the agent was not sent courtesy letters that I sent in July of 2022 and January of 2023. Staff response to that is I researched and verified with our administrative staff that public hearing notices were sent to the applicant owner and other interested parties. Copies of those mailing labels are included with the staff report as attachment 4. And the courtesy letters that I had sent to the applicant were not sent to Pacific Watershed and Associates because the agent of record was not clear. The department had sent a transfer packet to the applicant, which changed in September 22, and that transfer packet was never returned to us. And it's my understanding that Pacific Watershed and Associates wasn't under contract with the current applicant until about a year ago, but I had no way to know that, so the courtesy letters were only sent to the applicant. So the staff recommendation is to find that the denial is exempt from CEQA, make the findings to deny the conditional use permit and deny the appeal. And I'm a little redundant here, deny the appeal, and deny the conditional use permit for Abbey Road Farming LLC. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to offer the board any opportunity for ex parte communications to start out. I believe that's appropriate. Is that correct, Director Ford, in these de novo cases?
Yes.
Is that the basic defining element, that when they come before us de novo?
Basically, everything that we bring before you that is a development permit is de novo.
Okay, great. So with that, I do not have any ex parte communication to share. Anybody else? Yeah, so nobody else had any as well. And with that, I would like to offer the appellant an opportunity to come forward and present their case, and then we'll bring it back to the board for clarifications, discussion. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And you can pull that, yeah. there you go.
I think most of you know me, Kathy Moley, Pacific Watershed Associates. I have been on and off this property for several years. In working through the process, I first want to say I really appreciate the Building and Planning Department and all that they've done, and the Board of Supervisors for the issues that are in front of them. This is, as we all know, the cannabis cultivation has been a to say it lightly, a painful engagement throughout the community in so many levels. When Pacific Watershed was first on the property in 2017, and for the series of years afterwards, I just want to say that the applicant at that time was what I would deem a bad player. There was not a lot of forward motion. There was not a lot of progress. There were large amounts of refuse on the property, things that were completely unacceptable to Pacific Watershed Associates. There was several violations over the years, but the last violation that occurred on the property occurred at a time when going back another violation, but the applicant at the time fled the country and remains out of country. At that time, the financier for the property, who was a private financier when the person bought the property, had to foreclose on the property. And in doing so, that is the current applicant. He took over the LLC, but is a new player to the property, to the county, to even just the whole process. Once he came in that process in September of 2020, it was still it was a year and a half before we were able to get under contract. I'd been in communication with the applicant several times over that time period, trying to get under contract, trying to move forward. That we finally got under contract just over a year ago and started moving forward on the process. Understanding that the planning department wants a complete package. Earlier in the time period, we were able to kind of piecemeal things in and say, here's this and here's this. Pacific Watershed continued to work on the packet, but not having a full packet did not bring that to the planning department. I'm just learning now that there is a incomplete applicant transfer packet that needs to be complete. That's something that I can then go back to my client and pretty much enforce that this needs to happen, because had that happened before, I would have been notified in July of last year and then January of this year that that this was coming up for zoning administration, and we would then not be here today. We would have been, we would have dealt with everything and really pushed hard to get everything to the planning department so that they could make their judgment based on the merits of the application itself. So the planning department tells me that notifications were sent out at February 1st, that the zoning administration was meeting and that we were on the docket. For some reason, that's communication that I never received. Communication that the applicant apparently was sent out to, never was forwarded to me. So it was not until I received a letter dated March 10th that the appeal process had gone through, the application had been denied, and that we had a short window to do the appeal to the Board of Supervisors. Additionally, with that communication, there were several different versions of the letter that went out. When I first went in to talk to Planner Santos, he says, oh, that appeal period has gone by. You've missed the appeal period to appeal to the Board of Supervisors. I said, I don't understand that because I have a letter on my desk that says I have till March 15th at 5 o'clock. And he couldn't find that on the computer. But then by the time I got back to McKinleyville, he had located that letter and they said, yes, we will honor that 5 o'clock on the 15th to get that appeal in. And informed me what those fees were going to be. I talked with the applicant. He said, yes, move forward. He paid the fees. We got the appeal in. And so the appeal really is just to keep the application open. Don't close the application. Let us continue to submit the documentation so that the planning department can evaluate the project on its merits. So I'm happy to take questions. That's what I'm asking for, is that we're able to keep the application open. We've got the Fish and Wildlife application is moving forward. There are 4 crossings and 1 surface water POD. There's a lot of water storage to be purchased and put onto the property. The economics of the industry, as we all know, has been difficult and challenging the last few years. So, but we've been working diligently since this appeal process that we're providing the planning department with a complete application.
Thank you. And so you're under contract now with the
I am
applicant?
now under contract, yes, to
Okay.
do both this and to all the water board registrations.
Great, thank you. Director Ford or Santos, Mr. Santos, did you want to respond to what's been presented so far before we come back to the board?
I don't think we have anything. Really, normally what we're looking for is a response. It'd be better if responses would be given to the letters that we send out before going to a hearing. In this case, we didn't get a response until after the zoning administrator action had taken place.
Understood. I think there was some explanation about why that happened. Board, Supervisor Bohn?
Yeah.
And then
Kathy,
Bushnell?
hi. How you doing?
Good.
And I just, so basically, you've been working when they pay you, and when they quit paying you, you stop working. Is that where because it seems to me somebody would have been staying on top of this going, have you heard anything? And you would have been going, have we done anything? You would be calling Mr. Santos and everything else, and it sounds like, because it sounds like the notices were sent, and, and I know, everybody always says that the cannabis has been a nightmare, but we still lead the state, I think, in permits. So there's some people that, it's always a nightmare if it doesn't work out. So as we move forward, and it sounds like this could have just moved forward if you would have gone to Mr. Santos and Mr. Ford and says, hey, now have they given you enough money to take this to completion? Or is there a chance this guy's going to go, and he's going to go backwards, and then we'll be back in the same place, or you won't have wasted your time because you're getting paid. But how much staff time should be involved, and I know they have got to get paid too. So do you see this going to full fruition now, or are we going to be piecemealing this? Because
I see this as moving forward. The applicant is well-funded, and we have large deposits on our books right now that we're working off of to move forward with. Okay. The previous applicant stiffed me for a pretty high bill, largely because there were lots of things that came up in emergency situations, and we said, okay, we've got to deal this, we've got to clean this up, there were violations, there were lots of things happening, and working with code enforcement and other agencies within there. We moved forward in good faith. I have good faith in the current applicant and the current person I'm under contract with.
And you've said that there's no water available now because you need to buy water storage, you need to build water storage, you need to create situation. How long a process do you think this is going to take? Because I'm going to turn to Mr. Ford right after I'm done with you and ask him a question.
Yeah.
So.
And so one of the things that one of the things that was requested that we revamp the cultivation operations plan. And there is, right now, there's 11,000 gallons of storage, which is not nearly enough. And it's a matter of the applicant spending the money and getting it. But I am adamant that only the amount of cultivation, regardless of what the CUP goes for, whatever that square footage is, that they can only grow what they have water storage for. And so it's a matter of he goes and puts out $100,000 on water storage, or if he does 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 a month or a year, how that goes. So that I don't have a good answer on the timeline, but I am committed that they only grow what they can show they have storage for.
Oh, we'll make sure of that.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So I don't know if you have to tell them. I think staff will tell them that adamantly. So if I made a motion just saying we could put this off for 6 months and there is to be no cultivation on site at all till then, and all violations be cleared, and we have a check-in in 6 months, can we just move forward with this? Because Pacific Watersheds looks like they've been paid. They're on it. I think you have faith in their abilities, and it's the only reason we're here because nobody answered the letters, and in all honesty, Pacific Watershed should have probably called and says, are you guys doing it, but you hadn't got paid, so we're not going to send you things because you're probably not going to open mail to them because you weren't getting paid. So, I mean, we're not going to send you stuff because you're not actually their agent because they hadn't paid you. So, I mean, I think staff did everything. I've read this a couple of times, did everything possible. There was enough letters out. So if I made a motion to put this off for 6 months, extend this, the zoning administrator's ruling, is that acceptable to you, or are you just enough upset that they kicked you down the can for 6 years that?
No, not upset at all. This is not a matter of being upset. This is just a matter of when people aren't responsive, we're taking things forward for denial to clear the books. And so if that would be the desire of the board, I would offer that you approve the appeal and continue the conditional use permit to allow the applicant to make the application complete, and that they provide a minimum of $3,000 on account with the Planning and Building Department to continue processing the application.
Did you get that, Nikki? I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Motion by Bohn and second by Arroyo.
Thank you. Through the chair, Director Ford, it says has the permit changed hands since 2020?
It sounds like it changed hands in 2020.
So because the fines were paid September 4th and 10th, there were letters sent with no response, but then on October 30th, the fines were paid. So that's some kind of a response. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's with the new owners? So and you weren't involved then?
I was.
I mean, that's 3 years ago. So
let me.
Hold on, I have some more questions.
Yeah.
There's the interim permit right now is currently expired, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there a state permit being held?
Do you know that?
I don't think so.
No, not at this time.
So there is no cultivation happening or
Not at this
can
time.
happen?
No.
Okay. So, and this is a 1.0?
Yes. I'm sorry, who's asking you?
So I just don't, I'm not really connecting because you said that the new applicant is currently doing, is gung ho, but they've had the property since 2020 and there was no response then. I'm sorry, these guys have done a ton of work, and what's different now? They didn't pay you a deposit in 2020 and now they have?
So in 2020, during the whole transfer process, I was playing kind of a middle person between the outgoing owner, he kind of disappeared. I was working with the current applicant and moving him forward and working with code enforcement so that the fines got paid, and then he made some decisions. He later subsequently and it came back to me and said he's had some in the close family, friends, some very serious COVID issues. So he went AWOL for a little while. I spent time over that period trying to get him under contract, and I finally got under contract last spring. And yes, I'm sorry I've been reticent over the last year that there's not more forward motion. We knew there was not going to be any cultivation on the property until everything was cleared up. And not having received information from the planning department as far as immediacies, I didn't follow through.
Thank you for that. Director Ford, are there any outstanding monies owed on this?
I don't think there is. There really hasn't been a lot of work because the application's never been made complete. But that's why I asked for, as part of the motion, a $3,000 balance moving forward so we can verify that. It looks like there's about $1,000 still in the account, and then additional money to progress the application when the money comes in, or when the application material come in.
Okay. I know that we're coming up against some deadlines for having things complete with the county and the state, and I think that's December. And so with it, basically, you're going to be starting over, it looks like. You have a lot of work to do to get this.
I disagree because.
If I could finish,
Oh,
then
I'm
you could
sorry, I'm
respond.
sorry.
That's okay. I mean, you have a lot of work to get to before it sounds like you can get your interim. Director Ford, would they be getting an interim, or would it be go ahead?
So yes, we're not reissuing interim permits,
Thank you.
and the state is not reissuing new provisional licenses. So the path forward for this applicant is to get their local permit from the county, and then they can get their annual license from the state.
Okay, so there's a possibility that couldn't happen, and so then it would just be your time. I mean, I don't know, if they have to complete quite a few things to get that to a finished point, right?
Well, I think it's okay. There's not a limitation on the annual permit. The
Mhm.
limitations are on the provisionals.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. All right, well, thank you, and thank you for answering my question.
Thank you.
Supervisor Arroyo.
So normally I wouldn't point out like what seem like small typos, but given the communication challenges, I just noticed in looking at the appeal application, there's some inconsistency with the spelling of the applicant's name. I see that this person does live out of the area, so that is also a complicating factor here. But I just wanted to ask that we, after this, make sure that, and I think there's, like this person's name is spelled a couple different ways. So I just want to make sure that the contact information we have is accurate, given that there have been so many communication challenges. So I would just ask after this if you all could just verify everything, so that moving forward, this should this proceed, that there's good information.
Through the chair, good catch. I noticed that too, and I corresponded with Kathy by email saying it looks like the parcel's not right, looks like the spelling's not right. These are the changes I'm going to make to our system to be consistent with our other records. And Kathy wrote back and said thank you. So that was caught and fixed in our Acela system.
Okay, Supervisor Wilson.
I just still have concerns about the capacity of the applicant. I mean, I just don't want to, that is just, if it just seems like there's capacity issues, has been capacity issues, continues to be capacity issues, and then when that happens, it really puts strain on everybody. And I hear the $3,000, in an account. Is that really enough, Director Ford?
It probably will not finish the permit, but it will certainly allow us to at least review the materials and begin to move towards staff report.
Is it unreasonable to make an estimate of what it would take to finish the permit and just really have that as part of, to increase that? Because again, I don't want to like go $3,000 down the hole here and then have it just kind of fizzle out. And
Yeah, so part of my, normally a permit like this would run in the neighborhood of $9,000 to $12,000. I think they've probably put down about 3,500. So $8,000 to $9,000 is likely what it will cost to finish this.
I mean, and considering the track record from my perspective, like that would be about what I would say would be reasonable to ask for, to just put into the account and work off of that, because if the goal is to get to completion, and we've so far had an issue around capacity to be responsive, then from my perspective, that's where I think it would need. That would give me the confidence necessary.
Supervisor Bushnell?
Thank you. Through the chair, Director Ford, do you guys work within your $3,000, and then before that would be utilized, you would request more?
That is correct.
Okay, I don't see that need. Thank you.
So just to clarify that, when you get to that 3,000, then you stop work until you get additional deposits?
That is correct.
And then I think it was in this staff report that I noted that the appeal fee is, what, $2,000, and it does not cover all the work related to this appeal.
That is correct.
And it seems to me that that really ought to be on the applicant, to pay the real costs of processing this, not just the $2,000 fee, but whatever the real costs of processing this is, because it's really on the applicant for the delays, et cetera. So I would suggest that that should be part of the motion as well. Supervisor Bushnell.
Thank you. Through the chair, I understand what you just said, and that is correct, but I think that's something we need to update in our fee schedule. So are we going to go back and request that amount for every appeal? Because we haven't currently done that. I don't know why we would pick on this one. Those appeals have not ever been covered, and I think it's $1,800. Is it 18 or 2?
Yeah, it's around $1,800.
Yeah. So I understand what you're saying, and given that we're talking budgets, it's on everybody's mind, but Director Ford, is there an option to update that it would cover that? Or how does that work? And I am not in favor of just pushing that onto one appeal applicant when that price is not covering any of the appeals.
Unfortunately, we just updated our fees, and they go into effect, I believe, in June.
And it did not include this?
It did not include increasing the cost of an appeal.
Okay. Well, I recognize what Supervisor Bushnell is saying and agree with it. I think that if we get a larger deposit towards what we anticipate to be the real costs, that we're protecting our costs going forward. And that would be a good thing to be able to do, to see the seriousness of the applicant. As you said, he's deposited large sums in your account for retainer. Same needs to happen at our end, I think, to keep this whole. And unfortunately, what is it, once a year we update those fees?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like we need to put that on the to-do list.
Could I ask a question?
Please, Supervisor Bushnell.
So those fees have not came forward for our, for us to adopt, is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we are posting the public hearing. We have to notice it first, which I think is next week. I'd have to verify with my staff on the timeline, but I mean, there may be an opportunity if what you're getting at is, can we slap a change in there real quickly? We can verify.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask. Also, I think there was a motion and a second on the table, and I am not in favor for, since Director Ford requested $3,000 as a deposit, they'll notify that applicant, I think, well before that $3,000 is used for them to put more money down. It's on them at that point. I don't think us holding their money in case or in advance is necessary when Director Ford stated $3,000 would be what he would request at this time. Is that what I heard?
That is what I offered, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't think, I may be wrong, but I don't think we made a motion in a second yet. Did we? Okay,
did.
thank you. I stand corrected. That 70-year-old mind. Okay, so we have that motion, but it did not include the deposit of the larger amount. So I would like to see if the motion maker and the amender would be willing to accept the larger deposit of $9,000 rather than $3,000 into the account.
No.
Okay. Any other discussion at the board level? Okay, we'll take it to public comment. We'll start with Zoom.
Chair
And-
Madrone, we have caller 7718, and I apologize for cutting you off right there.
No worries. Thank you very much. I appreciate the assistance. 7718, it's your opportunity for comment on this item. There you go. Welcome.
From the public perspective, I think that Don's original estimate was kind of off the cuff. I think the total amount that we expect to have, some people may have more faith in this particular applicant than has been shown and justified. And I really want to thank your Mr. Santos for his presentation. It was very concise and very detailed. I appreciate that. But so much leeway being given on all these things, and all of a sudden something changes and we don't get paid. So I think at this late in the program, with what seems to be basically the person presenting here, now it's maybe they made an error. It does like they may be culpable in some way. That's just my impression of what's happened here. I also want to know, a whole bunch of things have transpired here, and apparently an LLC has changed hands. Is that LLC still in good standing and under the control of the current applicant, or where are we at on that one? We want to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's. I don't support increasing the amount of an appeal cost. It's already high. And in my opinion, even though it doesn't cover your cost, it's still something that I paid under more circumstances, and I appreciate you keeping it the same. But I do think that the deposit by this applicant should be increased to the full amount that would bring the project to fruition. That shows good faith. They feel they're going to move forward. If they don't have that confidence level to volunteer to do that, then I think maybe this thing should just be called done and stay with the original zoning administrator determination. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, commenter. And seeing no other hands up in Zoom, we'll go to those here in the audience today. Anybody like to make public comment? And seeing no other members of the public, we'll bring it back to the board for additional comments, considerations. Supervisor Arroyo.
Well, I think the conversation going into how we cover the true cost of these appeals is a good one, but I'm interested in hearing more about that as we move forward next week. But I support this because even though it feels like a bit of a long shot, but I do believe that since the purpose of these is in part to provide one more opportunity to respond, and we've heard this robust response, and this is a very interesting history with this particular application and property, but it sounds like they're making strides. I'm in favor of moving forward, but I also think that the topic that's raised around appeals and the true costs of that is worth following up on.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? Okay, we have a motion and a second in front of us. Do we have our voting tabs up?
Do you all have yours?
Yes?
Supervisor Wilson?
I can do a roll
Let's just
call.
do a roll call.
I'll just do roll call. Supervisor Bohn? Supervisor Arroyo?
Yes.
Supervisor Wilson?
No.
Supervisor Madrone?
No.
Supervisor Bushnell?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries 3-2.
Great. Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to go to reading our closed session items.
We'll have to return it to Chair
That's correct.
Madrone
We
to
will.
read them in at the time set.
Thank you very much. So at this point, we are in recess until 2 p.m., where we'll come back for our closed session items. Thank you, everybody. And we are back from recess, and we have 2 closed session items. So if our acting county counsel, deputy county counsel can read into the record the 2 closed sessions, please.
Thank you, Chair Madrone. It's the intention of the Board of Supervisors to meet in closed session on 2 items today. The first is a conference with legal counsel pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, Subdivision D1, to discuss existing litigation in the case of Pamela DeRose, executor of the estate of John R. Braun versus County of Humboldt, case number 4:18-CV-7383-SBA. And then the second item is pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.5 and 54957 to consider the public employee appointment for the position of county council.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will recess and go into closed session. And estimated time, an hour or less. Okay, thank you. We are in recess. Okay, we are back from our recess, and if we could have a report out from our Assistant County Counsel.
Thank you, Chairman Madrone. There is nothing to report out from closed session.
Great, and with that, we are adjourned.